The NES is a goldmine for what some would call diamonds in the rough. Counting unlicensed carts made by companies like Tengen, the console boasts a library of almost 900 cartridges, so obviously there are bound to be a lot of games out there that people haven't heard of. The NES was also a goldmine for examples of licensed games that don't suck. Of course, games like DuckTales and Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers come to mind pretty quick, and those games are very well respected for their quality. But those were Disney properties, so they were destined to be well known even if the games were crappy. Today we're taking a look at an NES game that's linked to a particular property that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, even with as well known as many hidden gems in the NES library are becoming, being more well known. And that's kind of surprising to me because even though it was made really late in the NES's lifespan, like after the SNES was launched late, this particular game had the backing of Konami, and this was back when Konami, actually made games, back when they had respect for the medium of video games, back before, their logo was less a symbol of quality and more a big moment of just eye-rolling cynicism from anybody who saw it. Released well after the launch of the SNES in 1992, Bucky O'Hare was a game attached to a license that was trying desperately to break into mainstream consciousness the way that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had. Cliff Notes version of the history. Bucky started out as a comic book published in the 80s by Continuity Comics, scored a toy deal, which led to an unfortunately short-lived animated television show in 1990, which led to both this game and a 4-player beat-em-up game for arcades, also made by Konami, and which also happens to act as the end of the series. But you aren't here for a history lesson. Maybe. So let's look at the game proper. The overarching plot of the Bucky O'Hare series takes place in a parallel universe known as the Aniverse, where the titular Bucky, a green anthropomorphic rabbit, leads the ship the Righteous Indignation, which by the way is the best name for a ship ever, manned by a small crew of rebels fighting against the evil Toad Empire, a hive mind community led by the evil AI Complex. The story of the actual game takes place at an indeterminate time during that struggle, where Bucky's ship is waylaid by a Toad battleship and his crew is scattered across 4 planets. Thus, Bucky needs to gear up, save his crew, and take down as many Toads as he can in the process. And that's the extent of the story. It doesn't get much deeper than that, but I will say that it's slightly more robust than what you typically get with games this old, that's for sure. Heck, it even has text-scrolling cutscenes. The gameplay is classic run-and-gun action. You move forward across the screen, shooting and platforming over obstacles, and your goal is simply to get to the end of the planet. Every single screen you traverse counts as a checkpoint, and if you die, you start from the last screen you reached. In fact, this game is very generous when it comes to that. This game has unlimited continues, and whenever you choose to continue, you just restart at the last screen you died at, with the only punishments you receive being your scores reset to 0 and your life meter returns to its default length, and that's it. What makes this game interesting is the fact that you get to play as multiple characters, 5 of them in fact. Every time you complete a level, Bucky rescues one of his crew members and they become playable. You can easily cycle through the available crew members by pressing the select button. Unfortunately, there's no way to quickly select the character you want, and while it does cycle through the characters in a set pattern, if you're in a high-stress situation, it can be a little annoying having to switch. And you are going to want to switch quite often because it's not a simple cosmetic swap, thankfully. Every character not only has a unique weapon, but also a unique movement ability that gives you different options on how to get past certain obstacles. Bucky, as your starting character, is pretty basic, but mostly well-rounded, and you'll end up using him a lot. His basic attack is a single shot that can be fired rapidly and crosses the entire screen. He's also the only character that can shoot upward, giving him another layer of usefulness. His special movement ability is a high jump that lets him clear most large roadblocks with ease. Blinky the Cyborg Cyclops is a more utility character. He tosses short-ranged bombs in an arc. While they can be fired rapidly, their short range, arc motion, and weak damage makes them almost useless for taking out enemies and obstacles directly in front of him. His main reason for existence is that his weapon is the only one that can clear blocks from the path. His special ability is a hover pack that allows him to clear long horizontal distances as opposed to Bucky's ability to clear vertical obstacles. Jenny the Psychic Cat is a character that's based around attack power and not much else. Her basic attack ability is a rapid-fire laser that causes a bit more damage than Bucky's base attack. It's great for clearing out threats or attacking bosses, but again, she can't fire up, which makes her less useful for certain sections of the game. Her special ability is the Toad Seeker Orb, which, I'll be honest, I don't find much use for. Once it's charged up, you fire off a floaty little orb that you take direct control of, and can use to destroy any enemy in your way. But it's tough to control, and Jenny's a sitting duck while you're using it. There's just a lot more options with how to deal with enemies in those situations where the orb would be useful. Deadeye Duck, the four-armed weapon expert, has a short-range spread shot weapon. It covers about half the distance that Bucky's blaster does, but it does spread out and can hit multiple targets, which is useful when you're getting swarmed. His ability is that he can cling to and climb up and down walls for a limited amount of time. Finally, there's Willie DeWitt, the analog human character and boy genius. Believe it or not, he's the bruiser of the crew. His basic attack is a high-powered laser that doesn't fire nearly as fast as the other characters, but it packs a whole lot more of a punch. And his special ability only makes it more powerful, firing off an even more dangerous and powerful laser that can take out even bosses in 1 or 2 hits. But due to its charge time, I don't think I ended up using it once. You can upgrade a character's ability by picking up these power coins scattered all over the place. By picking these things up, you'll extend the meter that charges their ability up to a maximum of twice. However, you have to pick up the coin as the character you want to upgrade, and if someone's already at maximum when they pick up the coin, well, congrats, you just wasted it. Luckily, the game starts throwing those things at you like they're candy near the end of the game, so I doubt you'll have a problem getting all the characters up to max before endgame. Of course, if by some chance you do, well, you're gonna be in for a very bad time. We'll get into that later. Certain characters are, of course, more useful than others, and the ability to shift between them quickly on the fly to fit the situation is pretty nice. And the fact that almost every obstacle in the game can be tackled in at least 2 different ways by 2 different characters means it encourages you to experiment a little bit. The dialogue scenes between the stages are pretty basic and simple, but they are a nice bonus, and I enjoy seeing the real simple English and the occasional grammar mistakes here and there. It's one of my favorite things to see in these old games. The gameplay is great, the movement speed is perfect, the controls feel tight, and the jumping is nice and responsive. This is a game that just feels great to play. But make no mistake about it, this is a game that adheres to old school platformer design to a T. Yeah, as much as I love this game, it does suffer from some of those old Nintendo hard philosophies that plagued platformers for a good long while. Stages are designed specifically to dick with you, and there are multiple instances where you'll die from an instant death attack or obstacle that you didn't see coming, or just because you didn't know the layout of a particular room well enough. The game is very generous with the amount of health it gives you, and chances are good you won't end up dying from ordinary enemy fire, even with the default health bar. Picking up life power-ups not only refills your health bar, but also extends your life meter, up to 2 times, the same way that the power coins can extend your ability meter. The only difference is, when you get a game over, your life meter goes back to its default length, which is comparatively tiny to the fully upgraded bar. Not that it matters much, because this entire game is full of one-hit kill obstacles meant to stop your progress and get you nice and frustrated, especially in the second half after you rescue your crew. Bucky and his crew operate under the same rules as Mega Man. Spikes are instant kills, and this game loves its spikes. Spikes on the walls, spikes on the ceilings, in the elevator, above you, below you, in front of you, behind you. Spikes are everywhere in this game, and that, combined with bottomless pits, can really make it frustrating. It's also compounded by the fact that when you get hurt, any and all forward momentum is halted. While you don't get knocked back by damage, when you get hit, you're dropping like a stone. Your invulnerability frames are also pretty limited, and it's not uncommon for you to take at least 2 hits from the same enemy, especially when you're temporarily frozen to where you're standing when you get hit. Again, the amount of health you're given makes it very difficult to die from taking damage, but it is there. This whole one-hit kill mentality is only exacerbated when you start fighting the bosses. All of them, and I do mean all of them, have at least one method of killing you in a single hit. Some of them, like this asshole right here, only requires you to touch him for an instant kill. Touch him anywhere, and it's an instant death, which makes killing him really difficult because the only way to actually hit his weak point is to get right up close and personal with him with someone like Deadeye. Or how about Toadborg here? The green planet, where Blinky is held, is, subjectively, the easiest of all the stages in the game, but then you're faced with this guy, and then this happens. Yep, if you get hit by that rock while it's still whole, you die. And what about this guy? He's one of the few bosses in the game that doesn't actually have an attack that will kill you in one hit, but he can still make you die in one hit if you take too long to defeat him, since the water level is slowly rising and you're constantly climbing towards a big ceiling of spikes above you. This guy is actually one of the easiest bosses in the game, but the fact of the matter is he can still kill you in one hit, if you don't beat him fast enough. The game also has a bit of an illusion of choice. There are only 4 stages at the beginning of the game, with a long series of linear stages after you beat those, but while the main menu says you can choose which of those planets you go to first, a la Mega Man, it's actually a bit of a lie because each of these planets actually has obstacles that can't be cleared without specific crew members. For example, let's say you're a first-time player and you decide you want to get Jenny back as your first playable crewmate, so you go to the blue planet. Within the first screen of the planet, you're faced with this, an impassable wall of ice that you can't get past because you don't have Blinky, who is the only character in the game that can break blocks. And there's not even an option to quit a stage and go back to the selection screen. At least not one that I've found. Bucky O'Hare is a game that doesn't really have much of a difficulty curve. Every stage feels relatively difficult in one way or another from the start, and it reaches a new level of difficulty when you enter the second half of the game after rescuing your crew. And then it takes another leap in difficulty during the final stage when the whole thing shifts genre to a shoot 'em up. So it's more like 3 difficulty steps rather than a curve. If you don't have patience for classic, or to some, archaic platformer design, Bucky O'Hare is most likely not going to appeal to you. But as I pointed out, the game's control is great. Aside from their weapons and unique abilities, Bucky and the crew all handle the same jump height, same movement speed, which is actually really damn fast. Seriously, you can blaze through most of the screens real quick if you just keep moving forward, though due to its design, there are plenty of instances where you have to slow down, analyze what's going on, and try to figure out what's the best way to approach the situation. The game also looks really nice, but then again, it's a late-era NES game from what was, at the time, a AAA well-respected developer. I'd expect it to look this good. While the backgrounds more often than not tend to be big black voids, when they do actually have a background, it looks suitably alien. And when you get to situations like this, where you have a lot of color on the screen, it pops really well. The designs of the environments are pretty simple, but they do invoke some nice alien imagery. I mean, look at this, it really does remind me a lot of older Mega Man games, but then again, given the game's design, I think that's definitely what the developers were trying to invoke. Unfortunately, the character sprites are kinda disappointing. They all look real nice, don't get me wrong, and all of our main characters look real close to the actual designs, but their animation is kind of lacking. They have a walk and a jump animation, but when they shoot, when they're idle, heck, when they get hurt, there's no reaction from them. The sprites may be detailed, but they sacrifice the opportunity to give these characters a bit more personality. The same goes for most of the enemies as well. Most of the time, they're just static sprites with no real expression or animation to them, and they don't really set themselves apart from the generic mooks you would see in other games. It isn't really until the end of the game where the generic enemies really start to show a bit more personality. Like this abomination hopping all over the place and splitting into 3 different entities. Or these scary Terminator beasts. They're completely invulnerable and just walk slowly and menacingly towards you, single-mindedly attempting to destroy you. Even the basic Toads do start to get a bit more personality during the final stage in the shoot-'em-up sequence. Rather than shooting at you, they know they're gonna blow up, so they want to take you down with them, and they'll just jump up and try to grab your speeder, dragging you down to try and get you caught between the walls or slamming into spikes. The music fares a whole lot better. All of the themes for the game are really fun to listen to, upbeat with that classic NES sound. I'm actually really shocked there aren't more remixes for this game out there given the quality of the tunes here. The main theme is a nice, upbeat rendition of the theme song from the cartoon, and it also plays during the game over screen, for some reason. But just take a listen to some of these tracks. You see what I mean? And it might just be me, but I feel like there's a bit more bass to these tracks than other offerings on the NES. The weak point for the game in terms of its soundtrack is definitely the boss theme. It's not really that it's bad per se, it's more that it's generic. It's the sort of music that you'd easily be forgiven for thinking it came from somewhere else. In fact, when I close my eyes, I think more of Mega Man when I hear the tune for some reason. The sound effects are also a bit of a mixed bag. For the most part it's fine, the shooting sounds have a good punch to them without being overly annoying, and the explosion sounds, especially when you beat a boss, are really satisfying. But the sound when you take damage is kind of weak, and some of the environmental sounds, like when you're dodging jumping lava, feels kind of overpowering. In fact, when there's a lot of stuff going on, the cacophony of sounds you're hammered with can be really overwhelming, especially if you're fighting a boss. Yeah, despite the fact that it's not really that sought after, its value has been on a rapid rise, along with pretty much all NES games. Nowadays, even a used cartridge in rough condition is still going to cost you upwards of $40, and don't even get me started on a good condition one. In some ways, I'm happy retro game collecting is a hobby enjoyed by so many people, but on the other hand, the fact that so many people are gaming the market right now makes it real hard for the rest of us that actually want to play these games. But that's a topic for another time.